Welcome back to another episode of A Mission Focused Life. I'm Tanner Payton from Rock Island, Illinois. With me is Tim Oloffson, the Executive Director of Another Child Foundation. We are so glad for you to be joining us today as we talk more about how we can live on mission in our everyday lives. Tim, how you doing, brother?
Hey, we are doing well down here in Tennessee. A little bit warmer than you guys are down there. This is kind of one of the reasons I moved down here, was to kind of get out of the more frigid temps. And it still gets cold down here, but not
cold, right? Mm-hmm.
But not cold. Not cold. Yeah. But no, we're doing well. We're doing well.
As we're coming into this Christmas season, we're going to talk about a couple of things today, but we're going to focus on a scripture that you brought up in Proverbs chapter 4, verses 23 through 24. Yeah. And I don't know, do you got that pulled up, or do you want me to pull that up?
No, I got it right here.
Okay.
But first of all, I always like Proverbs. I always like wisdom. And one of the things I've been learning through my process is I've always kind of read the Bible as almost as stuff that I can try to implement into my life. And Proverbs has kind of been like that. But instead of letting God speak to me through the scripture, I always try to figure out what I can take out of it and apply to my life. So I'm trying to go through that rethinking of reading scripture. Sure. And this hit me this week as I was listening to one of my favorite pastors do a sermon. And so wisdom is something I always try to learn more about. So first of all, in Proverbs 4, just the first verse, it says, "Listen, my sons, to my father's instruction. Pay attention and gain understanding." So I think that's something we all strive to do. But in 23 and 24, it goes on and says, "Above all else, guard your heart, for it is the wellspring of life. Put away perversity from your mouth. Keep corrupt talk far from your lips." And so that's kind of the subject I want to talk about a little bit today. And because it was based on the experience I've been having in my life, where there's been a lot of negative energy that's kind of come in, and this perverse or negative talk is just, and sometimes we just get involved in this, whether you're watching media on TV or the media, social media, there's just a lot of negativity and perverse talk going on there. So how do people like us do that? How do we keep that away from our hearts and guard our hearts? So how do we do that? So that's kind of the subject I think we want to talk about a little bit today in this podcast.
Well, it's interesting. I had a meeting last week with some of our aspiring ministry leaders in our church, and we talked about this very topic. What does it mean for us as ministers, or what does it mean for us who are living on mission to guard our hearts? And we jumped in from First Timothy chapter 6, verse 20, when Paul said to Timothy to guard what God had entrusted to him by avoiding godless, foolish discussions with those who oppose them with their so-called knowledge. So really, it just really kind of parallels what you just read from in Proverbs. And so for me, I know that when I'm beginning to struggle with guarding my heart, a lot of the times I have to do two things. I have to be very, very careful about what I'm allowing into my heart, but I also have to be very careful about what I'm allowing out of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I want to be sure to only allow good things to be coming in. Now, that doesn't mean that I isolate myself and keep myself out of the real world, but I don't allow myself to be bombarded with the attitudes and the ideas of the world. And then at the same time, I guard what's coming out of my heart, because Jesus says that from the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And so if I have negativity and different things like that coming out of me, well, then that's a pretty good indication that my heart's not in a great place. So I have to guard it on both sides.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. Because guarding your heart, I mean, that's because that is kind of who we truly are, is what you feel in your heart. And sometimes I know the heart can be deceptive, but we need to guard our hearts. And so I pray the prayer the same day: create in me a clean heart, oh God, because that's what I want. I want this pure heart as I can have in me, so that when I hear stuff and I discuss stuff, it comes out as clean as it can, and not perverse in any way. And what I found myself is in a situation recently, without going into too much details, where I seem to be a referee. I seem to be a referee on two sides of an issue, that two people who I feel are pretty strong Christians are just letting their emotions. So it's this negative emotional energy that's interfering with their hearts. And emotions can sometimes be very detrimental to conversations, because we
Sure.
think with our emotions instead of with what's logical. So I found myself in this position where I'm trying to be a referee, but trying to correct people's thinking without it being like, too direct. I don't know.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to do that. And then this just situation. Then I found what I'm pretty good at is being able to put off this negative emotional energy that people seem to bring into conversations. And we see that everywhere now. So how does a person like myself, who always looks at the bright side of things, always tries to find that silver lining in any dark cloud, how do I effectively let people know that what they're talking about is very unbiblical? Not so much maybe the words they're speaking, but the attitudes in which they speak it, all these emotions that come in. And so that's where I find myself. So I want to just discuss that with you just a little bit deeper today on how do we do that effectively?
Well, I think that we have to be mindful of two R words. And I think they're words that are often used synonymously, but in context, they really have different applications. And those two R words are response and reaction. So when I am in a situation, I want to be careful. And again, this goes back to guarding the heart. And if we look at verse 23, it says that we guard our heart because it determines the course of our life. And so it doesn't act like a compass, because a compass shows us which direction that we're going. It acts more like a rudder. Our heart is a rudder for our life. It's actually pointing us in the direction that we're going to be heading.
Yeah.
And so if I react, a reaction is not from a guarded heart. A reaction is from an unguarded heart, and it relies purely on my emotions. So it's simply me coming back to an emotion that has been brought up. So if a negative emotion is pointed at me or it's brought up in a situation, a reaction will be me bringing back the same emotion back with either the same amount of intensity or maybe even more intensity. Maybe I will react even stronger than what was initially brought to me. Whereas in a response comes from a guarded heart because it's something that has been premeditated. And so when I'm guarding my heart, I'm preparing myself for different situations that I'm going to be walking into. I'm preparing myself for whatever scenarios that I might be walking through, whether it be acting as a mediator, or I might be in a place of confrontation, or maybe it's just out in the world in everyday life. I'm guarding my heart by preparing it for what I'm going to be in the midst of. And so then when I'm ready for those things, I'm able to respond, because a response is measured, it's intentional, and it's done in a way that I'm trying to bring a better situation than what was previously brought to me. A reaction is, I don't really care. I'm just coming back with my emotions. A response is, I'm coming back, but I'm coming back with a guarded heart. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does. I love that, because I think that's a great takeaway for people who find themselves getting too emotional in conversations, is that if we think a little bit instead of just respond real quickly, if we or react real quickly, if we think about it and respond in the way in which our heart is centered, then I think that's going to be a much better, you're going to be able to have conversations that way. I think right now within our culture, there's very few conversations going on. What we're doing is we're protecting our own thoughts, our own belief systems, and then we have these battles because people are reacting, they're not responding. So I like that idea of so having your heart guarded, and basically what that means, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, it's just always being centered in what the gospel is all about, and having this ongoing, whether it's a relationship with Christ, however you want to justify or not justify, but quantify what a guarded heart is. It's just this purity, this pure heart that we all desire to have and all try to focus on. And because if you have that, then you always have that to go back to, and you can respond correctly instead of just reacting
Yeah.
because of lack of I don't know if it's lack of experience or how to handle certain situations. I don't know. So
I think experience definitely plays into. I think some of it is just emotional maturity, spiritual maturity. It's things that you do learn over time, but there's also a bit of intentionality to it of what do I want? I think another way to look at the difference between reaction and response is that a reaction is for my benefit. A reaction makes me feel better. A response is for someone else's benefit.
so,
Ultimately, I'm trying to help them to be better after the engagement.
yeah, I like that idea because what I found myself in recently was this mediator or this referee between two different viewpoints on something so I was trying to respond, but I was responding to people who were reacting, and so that didn't really go as well as, so what I needed to do is try to get them to respond, I guess, more than just react. And I don't know I haven't thought about that. I don't know how a person who is in that, because I find myself in those positions quite often because a lot of times, because a lot of people think that people who are, oh, you're so steady, you're always so even, and that's an easy thing to do. And it's not an easy thing to do. It's kind of my personality that I am that way. And I look at it as a benefit, but a lot of people just think that it almost reflects that you don't really care about situations too. Is you're so even keel that you don't get emotional. How come you're not mad about this? Or how come you're not excited about this? Well, I just don't go up or down. I just kind of stay steady. So people that react emotionally, I guess, I don't know. What do you think?
Well, so I think a big part of learning how to respond is training ourselves and training others to look at things from another person's perspective. That is, I think, the foundation of it. So let's use sports as an analogy, whether it be if you're playing a game of tennis, or if you're playing a game of checkers, or you're in a boxing ring, or really any type of thing where you're working in opposition to another person. If all you do is react, you're rarely going to be victorious or win unless you're working against an opponent who is just new as you are. When you begin to win or when you begin to have success is when you begin to analyze and understand the person that you are engaging with. Well, when we are responding, our goal is not to overcome the other person, but it is to understand them. So I'm not reacting. I'm not being taken off guard. I'm not just trying to survive so that I'm coming out on top. I'm responding by really trying to understand, okay, how in the world did they arrive at this place?
Yeah.
How in the world do they think this way? What has happened to them that they are coming at me with this perspective, with this anger, with this attitude or this worldview? And I really try to understand where they are. And once I understand where they are, well, now I can begin to have compassion. I can begin to have empathy, and then love for that person wells up within me. And now I'm not looking just to beat them. I'm looking to help them.
Yeah.
And that's where that heart of response is born.
Yeah. I love that analogy because I remember playing racquetball with a very experienced racquetball player. He had me running all over I was just reacting to everything he was doing and just trying to survive and just keep alive. And I think that's the way a lot of people approach some conversations is they might be knowing that they're going to get beat here, but they just do whatever it takes to kind of survive and to make them feel better. And so as I got better as a racquetball player, I kind of figured out his strategy. And then I was responding to him because every time I'd hit it to that one corner, he would come back with this shot and I'd be running all over this court all the time. So I like that. So that really helped me think a little bit about these conversations and how I can help people come to get in the right place to have a conversation instead of just reacting.
Well, and I think this, one last thought carrying off of what you just said from the racquetball analogy. In verse 24, it says, avoid all perverse talk, stay away from corrupt speech. So a person who's looking for reaction, they're just going to be throwing haymakers, right? They're just going to be trying to throw the knockout punch every single time. they're not going to be listening to the response that comes back. All they're going to do is try to make as many points in as short of amount of time as possible. And they're not actually going to be listening. So Solomon here in his wisdom is telling us, if you are responding to someone and all they're doing is reacting, then the best thing that you can do is just get out of the conversation until that person is in a mindset where they're ready to respond and not react.
Yeah.
So first, we have to guard our heart and get to the place where we can respond. But then the second part of that is, if we're not engaging with somebody who's ready to respond, then we're not going to have that conversation until they're ready. So I think that both of those parts have to be there for us to be successful.
Yeah. And I think that's another good point that you brought up, is because time is such a, it kind of heals a lot of things. And this confrontation I was in between two people was very much emotional. It was an emotional situation. So, and now since time has passed, I think we'd be in a lot better place to have this conversation. Haven't had it yet, but I think if we did, I think it would be easier, because they've been able to think through the situation more instead of just reacting to this current situation and trying to get what they think is the right resolution to it, instead of, so they were trying to get it emotionally, trying to come to this conclusion instead of with a rationale thought. And that's where it gets back to guarding your heart. I really appreciate this conversation we've had, Tanner. It's helped me out a lot. And I think it'll help other people too, who find themselves in these conversations, that it's because it's very frustrating for everybody. When this negative emotional energy enters into conversation, we need to try to get it out of there. And sometimes it might be something you can do by postponing that conversation, or I guess if you got the right people, you can maybe correct the course of that conversation through some very tactical questions that you may ask them. But that can be hard though at times, I think.
It is, but it's worth it. And it's right on point with being on mission, doing life on mission, because Jesus says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be known as sons of God." Yeah. And so this is life on mission. We are here to bring peace. We're here to bring reconciliation. And so we have to learn how to resolve conflict and how to have that guarded heart so that we can respond and not react.
Yeah. I think that's a great place to end this conversation, Tanner. So I just wanted to thank you for your insights. I know this subject we just brought up today, and you may have a little bit of prep time on it, but not a whole lot. But you've had a lot of wisdom yourself to this conversation. I appreciate it. So,
well, thank you. Thanks for the ability to be a part.
Yeah. So, well, that's all the time we have for this episode of Mission Focused Live podcast. I want to thank you guys for viewing it. Now, if you want to join and become part, be a subscriber, you can do that on the missionfocusedlive.com website. If you want to make comments on this, go ahead and do that too. But thanks for watching, or thanks for listening. And until next time, go out there and love God, love people. Thanks.